in partnership with CommSec.
All right, I've had a nice couple of runs on the last few days. Tom Piotrowski over at CommSec with a look at how we end up on Friday today. How do we start off anyway, Tom?
Pete, good morning. Well, the good news is that run is likely to continue. The futures are pointing to a gain of 0.5% for the ASX 200 this morning. Pete, we have seen further gains for Northern Hemisphere markets overnight on both sides of the Atlantic. There were important events. So in the US, this week has been characterised by the release of inflation figures. Days ago, we saw the CPI figures released. Last night, it was the producer inflation numbers, which passed without too much in the way of blemishes. And the bottom line is the market's now resolved on the fact that the belief that the US Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rates by 0.25% next week. There's more than 70% chance in the eyes of the market that that will happen. Still a 1 in 3 chance that we might see a bigger cut of 0.5%. So that belief was what spurred US markets higher. The Nasdaq up by 1%, the S&P 500 up by around 0.75%, and the Dow Jones up by about 0.5%. Technology names evidenced by the Nasdaq doing quite well. Nvidia shares were up by around 2%. Broadcom up 4%. Pete, banks continued to underperform. That was probably one of the areas that stood out again. That's been a feature of the week. European markets were higher, led by the German DAX, up by 1%. The European Central Bank cut a number of its important rates, the official rate by 0.25%, and left the door open for another rate cut in October. So the French market and the UK market up by about 0.5%. The German DAX up by 1%, as I mentioned. Commodity prices have benefited from a moderation in the US dollar. The gold price has hit a new record high, up by almost 2% at 25.59 for the spot price. We've got the Aussie dollar, an example of that decline in the US dollar, trading at 67.2 US cents.
Okay, you're an adventure man, Tom Piotrowski. If you could afford it, if you had hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, would you want a private spacewalk?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, stick around because this story is for you. Talk to you later, Tom.